This week, I'm joined by Mr. Matt Alderman here in studio to talk about the enterprise security news, including 5 tips on how testers can collaborate with software developers. Imperva discloses a data breach. VMware unveils security enhancements in its virtual cloud network offering, and how Veristor, that sounds better. Veristor and Synack partner to apply ethical hackers and AI technology. In our second segment, we air 3 pre-recorded interviews from Black Hat 2019. Chris Kennedy from Attack IQ, Balaji Prasad of Blue Hexagon, and Mike Weber of Coalfire. In the final segment, we got 3 more pre-recorded interviews from Black Hat: Brett Wallen of Respawn Software, Andrew Homer of Morphosec, and Matt Gangwer from Sophos. Stay tuned for all that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
Cloud-first development helps your business move fast, but misconfigurations and blind spots are part of the deal. App and dev teams get the flexibility, while security teams are left with the stress of managing new risk using legacy workflows. ExtraHop RevealX provides cloud-native network detection and response, backed by cloud-scale machine learning that helps you spot threats and unify processes across hybrid environments. Learn more at extrahop.com/securityweekly. That's extrahop.com/securityweekly. Networks are becoming increasingly complex and fragmented, and digital transformation and DevOps are driving an explosion in network connectivity changes. With each new network connection, cyber attackers may gain another opening to breach or traverse the network. At Tufin, they've pioneered a policy-based approach to network security management using automation and analytics. As a result, you can make network changes in minutes instead of days, reliably and securely. To learn more about Tufin, the security policy company, go to securityweekly.com/Tufin and sign up for a free evaluation. By the end of 2020, 99% of exploited vulnerabilities will be publicly disclosed and known to IT system admins. The consequences of that fact means the burglar will already be in your house because you left the front door wide open by failing to patch known vulnerabilities. How can you keep the threat actors out? Through cloud-based automation, Automox enables you to slam the door on unpatched OS and third-party vulnerabilities across your entire Windows, Mac, and Linux infrastructure. Take advantage of a free trial with Automox to not only see the vulnerability status of your infrastructure, but do something about it within minutes. Start automating the fundamentals of cyber hygiene at securityweekly.com/Automox. That's securityweekly.com/Automox. Welcome to episode 151 of Enterprise Security Weekly for August 28th. 2019. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian, joined in studio by Security Weekly CEO Matt Alderman.
I'm in the house. I'm clean shaven. I got the haircut and everything just for you.
Yeah, you're looking good. Looking good. Nice to have you here in studio, Matt. Couple of quick announcements. Exciting news about the Security Weekly webcast program. We're partnered with ISC Squared as an official CPE provider. If you attend any of our webcasts, you will be receiving 1 CPE credit per webcast. You can register for upcoming webcasts with Zane Lackey of Signal Sciences, which is not today, tomorrow. Stephen Smith and Jeff Rocher of Logarithm. And of course, you can check out our on-demand archive at securityweekly.com/on-demand and get those CPE automatically, right?
I think what we have to collect now is their ISC Squared number.
The number, right?
Their number. And once we have that number, we submit that to ISC Squared. They put the credits on automatically.
We do it for them, basically.
Yes. Yeah. And we'll fix some of this with the subscriber stuff and make it easier, but we'll need their number to do it.
Gotcha. Security Weekly will be at Hacker Halted in Atlanta, Georgia, October 10th through the 11th. EC Council is offering our listeners a $100 discount to attend the 2-day conference. Use the discount code HH19SW when you register, or go to securityweekly.com/Hacker Halted. I will be delivering one of the keynotes, and Jeff Mann is speaking as well. It's going to be fun times in Atlanta.
Yeah, Hotlanta.
Hotlanta.
It may not be that hot in October, but it'll probably be warmer than Colorado.
It's very true. Very true. Alrighty, enterprise security news, Matt. Where do you want to start?
Well, pretty big announcement from VMware. VMware had 2 announcements. But
Did they have VMworld like recently or something? A lot of VMware.
It's this week.
Okay.
So VMworld's this week.
Yeah.
But right before VMworld last Thursday, I think. So we missed it on this show. They acquired Carbon Black.
Right.
And that pretty big announcement, and then they did some announcements this week as part of VMworld. The Carbon Black one's interesting. There had been rumors for a while that Carbon Black was potentially going to be acquired. There were rumors about private equity potentially coming in and acquiring them back in May timeframe.
Yep.
And part of this was, I think, they went IPO. They struggled for the first few quarters out of IPO. Their market cap actually dropped below $1 billion in the April timeframe. Kind of dipped below $1 billion. And was starting to recover. These rumors kind of went away for a little while. Like I said, in May, there was discussions, rumors out there on PE. And then last week, VMware pays $2.1 billion to acquire Carbon Black.
Good for them. I believe it's 2 Boston-based companies, right? Carbon Black and Bit9 merged.
Right.
They finally settled on the Carbon Black name.
Correct.
Customers have been, from what I've heard, pretty happy with them. It does require, the one thing I did hear consistently is that it requires some care and feeding, some time to configure. But if you do that, you get the benefit of that effort. That's, again, what I'm hearing on the street. Your mileage may vary. You may be sitting in your car yelling at me going, it's a terrible product, or going, it's easier to configure than Paul's saying. But I think everyone has different experiences with different products and different environments.
Yeah, I think one of the early challenges after Carbon Black and Bit9 came together was consolidating the agent. I'm not sure they're 100% there. It's consolidated architecture, but I still think there's a couple little processes running it on the back end.
Bit9 was one of the first companies to come out, and one of the first to say, like, the old AV and signature is completely dead. We're doing it all heuristic style, even before the term machine learning. I went to lunch with them when I worked at Brown, because they're a local Boston company. And it was a great team, and they would, really, what I got from them early on at Bit9 was they wanted to be innovative and different, right? And I always respected that they were deviating from what was there. Of course, now, today, we've got 50, 60 vendors that are deviating from that.
There's like 85 of them.
Even more, right?
But this is an interesting trend a little bit for me is you had 2 of the big unicorns in the endpoint detection response space go public. Carbon Black first, not as successful, over $1 billion market cap, but nowhere near the success of CrowdStrike's IPO earlier this year.
And you got Cylance that was bought
Cylance got bought by BlackBerry.
Yep.
Endgame got bought by Elastic.
So we've seen some acquisitions.
So you're seeing some consolidation in the space, right? And I think the interesting trend is you take a company that went IPO as an exit, got acquired, great for them, because they kind of got a double bite at the apple, which is good for them. But the question now for me is what happens to the other EDRs?
Yeah.
You've got a bunch of other EDR companies out there, and if the IPO path isn't right for them, do we see a little more consolidation?
Well, I think we are, because a lot of the endpoint companies that we've briefed with and spoken with in any capacity, they seem to be now a little more niche-y, right? In the past couple of years,
they have to be.
They have to be.
They got to find their differentiation, or they're not going to survive.
I think a lot of their exit paths, quite frankly, are acquisition, because they are so niche-y. I think you're going to see a couple of those players expand, maybe make some acquisitions to build up something that's more comprehensive, right? But I think the options we have today for a comprehensive endpoint security suite are the big ones that we just kind of mentioned that have been that consolidation, or CrowdStrike with the IPO route.
So the other interesting thing about the VMware in the news this week is they also bought Pivotal, which is the container platform, basically. And look, so VMware,
they got to make a play.
They've got to make a play.
People obviously still run VMs, right?
They do.
There's so many advantages to.
But you're also seeing a lot of abstraction away from just dedicated VMs, because now I can get them in the cloud.
Yes.
So if I'm running virtualized infrastructure in the cloud, what's VMware's future?
Right.
VMware made this strategic partnership with AWS to be able to run VMware in AWS cloud. Good for them. Gave them some longevity. But as we continue to see the shift happen, and we see the data center numbers coming down, you have to do something, right?
Yeah,
and so now you're seeing some moves into the container space, some additional components in the endpoint space, other security announcements out of VMworld.
You wonder at what point there was a meeting at VMware where someone said our market share is going to significantly shrink. I don't think it's ever going to go away.
No.
I mean, don't get me wrong.
Right.
I mean, we still have bare metal in the data center. We still have VMs. I think we're always going to have that in some capacity.
Yeah.
However, I think it's going to shrink as we get caught up as IT and security professionals in learning all this new architecture. We're going to start pulling our architecture into we have discussions about this every week, right? How do we pull our own small infrastructure and piece it out into the cloud?
Exactly.
Right?
How do we get out of the business of managing infrastructure, right? For us and our apps, because we don't have a dedicated IT staff. It's you.
And even if you do, there's so many advantages, right? I think security is a double-edged sword. There are some advantages, but I think there's largely a configuration hot
There's a
mess
lot
that
of
goes on.
complexity and yes.
But performance, cost, all play into it, right?
Yeah,
we
it
have a
does.
conversation about Lambda. I'm like, wow, I could speed up certain functions in our app by 2 or 3 times if I was just calling serverless architecture. Now, it doesn't solve everyone's problem,
right?
And I think people misuse it like every technology, right?
We have a very specific use case where Lambda works, which is...
And a lot of people do.
We publish, and that publishing function happens, and then it goes away, right? Once our stuff's been published, we don't need that service running in a container for the rest of the day or the rest of the week.
Right. But if I'm publishing multiple things at once, here's the double your speed. I can publish to a destination, the same destination, but 2 media things are publishing at the same time.
Exactly.
And it's those advantages that are driving people to the cloud.
Yeah.
It's not security. Security is holding people back from the cloud. It's the complete opposite, right?
We're still having challenges there. But the other article, so there's 3 VMware articles in here, but this article is really interesting because the headline says it all. A steadfast VMware bear says that the $4.8 billion it's spending on big acquisitions, Pivotal 2.7, Carbon Black 2.1, doesn't change its stagnating growth.
Right.
Okay? This is coming from the market, right? So obviously VMware is making some moves. It doesn't really look like it's going to have a big impact on growth, but you're starting to see stagnation of growth of VMware because of all these trends.
Moving slow.
Yeah. And here's what every security company needs to realize. It's coming to your door soon.
Right.
Because everybody's going to experience this. If you think about all the technologies that we wrap around the endpoint and the virtual machine, and think about the focus everybody's had over the past 10, 15 years of going after the endpoint, if VMware sees a slowdown, some of these security technologies are going to experience that same slowdown at some point, right? So how do you strategically move to stay ahead of where the trends are going to keep your business moving? And this is a great kind of set of articles that really says, look, they're making acquisitions, but analysts don't think it's going to impact their growth much. That's still a little concerning for the public future of VMware anyways. Boy, that was a segment.
Yeah, it was in and of itself, right?
Yeah.
Key takeaways from Black Hat. Did you happen to peruse that?
I
really wasn't much there, huh?
Not a lot, right? Windows vulns, some Apple vulns, some tips and tricks of what not to do at Black Hat, which we've talked about in the past before.
Ad nauseam, yeah.
So you don't get hacked, like don't use the public Wi-Fi at Black Hat and all this other stuff. So not a ton in there. You and I didn't really get a chance to spend time on the floor. People will know our recap of Black Hat by watching the next 2 segments of all this pre-recorded content, some great sessions that came out of there.
I think one of the things the article touches on is Windows drivers and such. And I think if you extrapolate that and pivot into firmware drivers, right? I think one of the big gaps, and we did the interview with Eclipsium at Black. I don't know if that's aired yet or not, but if it has, check it out. If not, look for it when it comes out. There's a huge gap there in we're not managing and patching all of our firmware for all of the components that are in everything from our laptop to bare metal.
Think about all the little pieces in here that have firmware.
And we're always going to have some type of like the user is always going to have some type of technology, right, that they're going to use. And that technology today largely has a lot of subsystems and components. And it's very difficult to manage today.
Yeah.
I know Lenovo is making some strides to improve that user experience and making partnerships so you can go beyond just Lenovo hardware. I did a briefing with them, and they've got some really smart security people that are working on that. And there's been big vulnerabilities in security incidents based on a lot of that, and largely because it's one of those untapped areas, right? Similar to IoT.
Yeah.
I mean, it is like an IoT device inside your computer.
Yeah, but IoT's only exacerbating the problem.
Yeah.
Because we're seeing a lot more firmware embedded in these small little devices that are now proliferating all over your house, your business, wherever, right? So the problem's only getting worse.
Yeah. So you got to pay attention to that, because I think that's going to bite us. And especially we've seen more and more instances of malware that persists. We've always said, well, if it gets in the BIOS, it can persist when you wipe it. Now there's a lot more places for it to hide and a lot more vectors for it to take advantage of in those systems.
Yeah.
So,
agreed. Which you're not supposed to see in the cloud, but
yeah. Well, it's the cloud provider's problem at that point, right?
Yeah, at that level, yes. Other malware persistence is another problem in itself.
Garukal says 1 in 4 workers would steal company information to secure their job.
Okay, so
interesting kind of survey.
Yeah, but
like, you got people to admit they would, really?
They do, but here's I always look at kind of the details, right? 476 respondents. Yeah, it's not a big number.
You kind of need over 500.
Yeah,
really.
You'd want more. Look, if you're going to go out, and this is IT security professionals, 476 responded, 24% said they would do it. Is this a broad enough survey to really believe the numbers? The N of 476 isn't that high.
Yeah.
And so with that, you kind of have to take a grain of salt to say, maybe not. I don't know. Maybe it's not that high. I look at the respondent numbers and go, that's kind of low. So I don't know how valid there is.
When it comes to people acting unethical without morals or values, I think it's different answering a survey question than actually doing it in real life.
Yeah.
Not to say that we don't have an insider threat problem. That certainly is a problem we have to address. But I think it's different from, I mean, you're clicking on a survey, right? Saying, yeah, I mean, in that situation, maybe I would, right? But when it comes down to it, I mean, some people would. Don't get me wrong, right?
Yeah,
but
I mean,
measuring that, I think, is very difficult.
It's very difficult. And there's a huge case out there with McAfee and Tanium right now on this specific topic, right? Supposedly some of the insiders at McAfee took a bunch of customer accounts, went over to Tanium, McAfee suing them, whole 9 yards. So it happens.
It does.
It does happen, okay? I'm just not sure it's this high. But anyways.
Yeah. When it does happen, I've always said it's very damaging. It's one of those,
of course,
least frequently occurring but very damaging events when you plug that into your risk equation, right?
Yeah.
That can be difficult. Imperva disclosed a data breach. They were kind of getting smacked around a little bit on social media. It goes back to our discussion about being forthcoming, and I don't have all the details. Of course, I don't know what details have been made public, what hasn't.
Yep.
They issued an apology, profoundly regret. They're very clear that the data exposure is limited to the Cloud WAF product, so they did define the scope.
Right. It was part of one of their acquisitions of Encapsula.
Yeah.
They acquired a company to use to build out their cloud-based WAF, which they need to do, by the way. I mean, Imperva struggled a little bit in the WAF market as people have been moving to the cloud. They had to build a cloud-based WAF. They buy Encapsula in 2017.
Yep.
Now some of those API keys and customer-provided SSL certificates are exposed. Some of the conversations I've had, it sounds like a cloud misconfiguration.
Yeah. And that's...
And we've been talking about this
absolutely.
in nauseum. But again, we see these over and over. A lot of these breaches are going back to a misconfiguration in a component of your cloud infrastructure that is allowing exposure of sensitive data. And we're going to talk a little bit about this on the webcast today with Endgame about some of the key components. And configuration, to me, is a big part that's just kind of missing as part of that overall security program. We all go after the vulnerability. We all go after the threat and response. And sometimes we forget about some of those other basic hygiene components, and configuration is a huge part of it, especially in the cloud. Here's another cloud misconfiguration disclosure.
They do say that you recommend you reset your API keys, reset your passwords, enable two-factor authentication, API keys, and upload new SSL certificates. Kind of makes me think that should be normal state of operations. If you struggle with that, you need to improve your processes. And a lot of people struggle with that. I'm not going to lie.
We've talked about this, right?
It's really hard.
It's a hard problem.
It is.
It's a hard problem to manage. Changing out all your keys without some level of secrets or vaulting and how that all works. There's a lot of challenge there, especially in an environment where you potentially have a lot of different cloud components that are all using these API keys to communicate. You swap out one, you don't swap out another, and then the app doesn't work. This is not easy.
Yeah, I think we've got a long way to go to make that an easy process. There's a lot of vendors, too, that I think are coming in the market, the security market, to help you with that problem.
Yes.
But it's still
young.
It's a lot of architecture and engineering right now.
And it's a lot of integration into your DevOps processes, because that's really where it's coming from. Doing it after the fact, I think, is a lot harder to manage. So it's really good integration of these technologies into your existing DevOps process that I think are going to be critical to do this well going forward.
It's also really hard to test what's going to happen in production, because typically you've got different secrets and passwords that you're using for development and staging, and then when you get to production, it's a different set. So, you can test changing, but ultimately you've got to change those in production. There's no way, a good way to test that, right? Because production's really always going to have a separate set of credentials.
It is. What you hope, though, is that you can do some level of validation of the interdependencies and the configurations to know that, okay, I'm not opening up a hole potentially, but that's still pretty tough. I mean, people do this. So there's a lot of technologies. One of the advisory clients I've been working with is trying to actually do parts of this, because a lot of people do it at runtime. So they wait until the infrastructure spun up, and then they go to the cloud console and then try to grab all this data from the different services and try to piece this together in runtime. The challenge with that, it's almost too late.
Yeah.
Because as soon as that infrastructure's spun up, we know China's hitting them almost instantly, right? We know
and
that.
So are users trying to use that.
Yeah, so are users, so is everybody else. And so doing it at runtime is almost too late, but there's a lot of technologies on the runtime side. Question is how far back can you shift some of these capabilities and tests so that you know that when it gets spun up, it's more secure than waiting until it's after it's spun up.
I guess more advanced setups will spin up production. I guess theoretically, and I don't know how to do this, but theoretically you've got a production environment running and you're spinning up a second production environment with the new keys, and you can do some limited testing and then make the cutover. But that depends on your environment.
Kind of like our staging to production.
But staging's not really
right. It's not.
Staging is for integration testing, which right now I use separate sets of keys for a lot of things. And primarily, the primary driver for that is if it's a third-party API, like we ran into with YouTube, you've got quotas that you've got to deal with, and if you fill up a quota in production, that's really bad. So now you've got different keys with different quotas that you're using, and what we just did recently is development, staging, and production all have different. Like in YouTube, they call it projects, right? They get issued a separate set of keys that all have different quotas. So if I fill it up in development, it's fine. Production's still running. So it depends on a lot of different things, but certainly not an easy problem to tackle.
Definitely not. It kind of leads into this Ixia article on the importance of path discovery. Because this article is talking about understanding network and application performance and why understanding kind of path discovery and traversal is important. It ties into that conversation a little bit, right? Yeah. Because now if I'm spinning up some new components and I'm testing them with new keys, what are those dependencies of the paths and the different communications? In an application, it's even more than just, here they're talking IP address kind of path discovery. It's more than that, in my opinion, because that's a part of it, but I also have all these path traversals via APIs and some other things that
within
are
your own app,
right,
too.
within the own app. And so I'd like to see them take this even further on path discovery to really understand not just network path, but API paths, etc. Because if somebody can solve this graph, the graph view of an application when it comes to both your network paths, your application API paths, etc., that visibility will help security tremendously.
Right. Now, in the container space, do they give you that? Because I haven't done like a Kubernetes with like an enterprise container security deployment. But I'm assuming like I know within our own containers like what should have access to what, right? And you configure that in Docker and Kubernetes, like this container talks to that container and this container talks to that database, and you can pin everything down in a couple of different ways.
You can. This is where some of the container security products fit in, right? Is if you're running at the kernel, you're running inside the container, then you can start to see the communication from the container to container. Right. And one of the interesting parts about containers, when you're running on a Kubernetes cluster, you don't have to hit the TCP/IP stack.
Yeah,
because a container can communicate to another container without hitting IP addresses. And so you need to layer that piece on top of your network piece and kind of give that full traversal and kind of path discovery.
Yeah, it's more like paths to resource, because like in Docker, like storage and networks are just resources that you assign to containers basically in enterprise environments in Kubernetes, right? You would say, I've got these, they're basically resources. Networks and volumes are resources that you create.
But if you're in monitoring system process calls and you see a net bind to something you don't expect.
Yeah, so you can monitor that with container security products, right?
That's right. Where do you want to go next?
A lot of VMware stories.
Yeah, I know. I think we covered VMware too.
We covered API security, ways to authenticate. That was another article as well.
Yep, very good one there too.
We covered that.
Oh, the 5 tips on how testers can collaborate with software developers.
Oh yeah, we started on that one, and then I think we drifted away from it.
Yeah, well, I jumped right to VMware because there was just so much news on VMware side that I wanted to do. This is an interesting article from ThreatStack, and the reason I say that is I've been screaming on aspects of this for a couple years now, is how do security folks work better with the development folks when it comes to security testing. And so there's some tips in here. I think
they're pretty good, actually.
They're pretty good. I always say, look, the first thing you have to do is ask the question. Security's got to go over to the DevOps team and start to understand what they're doing and build a relationship with the developers prior to going out and doing a bunch of black box testing, taking a 300-page report of vulnerabilities and throw it over the fence. Because I'm going to tell you right now, that's not going to work, right?
What I foresee, it might be somewhat controversial, is a migration away from black box testing. I really do. Like I think there's a need for it.
You did all the research on black box testing when we were at Tenable.
Yeah.
It's tough.
For web apps, anyway.
For web apps, right? It's tough.
It's tough really in any environment. And I've always kind of struggled with it from a pen tester environment. I think it does have its place, certainly.
It does.
But I think we're going to see a path away from that and more into testing with some knowledge.
Yes.
Right? And I think you're advising a startup that's, and I realize in our own, let's take an application, right? You know where the bodies are buried. Not only that, you can test it much better with a layout of the application.
Yes.
And I think this is really where I think it has to go here to support DevOps, right? It's one thing you're going to spin up your application and someone from the outside is going to hit it. And sure, you're going to do that every once in a while. And you may scan it and have other tools that access it in different environments. But I think what's missing is like you can just write code that tests it as it's being built inside the application itself. And I think that's really
this is where stuff has to move.
A lot of testing is going.
And so security vendors have to think about how do they integrate their products in, again, back into that DevOps pipeline, right? To make sure that I'm testing at certain stages as the code's moving through, because the earlier I catch it, the easier it is to fix.
Yeah, and what I think that, static analysis and linting is one thing, and black box testing is another, but there's something
There's
in
a whole bunch in the middle.
In the middle that I think there's a gap right
Software
now.
composition analysis to understand what's embedded in there.
Yep.
Different validation points through the build process as it moves into test and development. It's better test scripts against certain test use cases that you're looking for before it moves to staging, et cetera, right? So it's all these little steps along the way that have to be validated in the process. And right now we're doing it at the front end with static code analysis for the source code, and at the back end, there's a big gap in the middle.
Just all the routes in your application, right? Like regardless of what your application is, there's a point in where you can write test scripts that can go build a map of everything that's available in your application and then feed that into another testing script or function. And I think that style of testing is really, you're going to not rely as much on black box testing to find those things. You're going to find it in the build process when you can execute a script that goes, okay, here's a map of everything in your application. Now I'm going to go test it.
Right.
And the testing process and procedures and like what you're testing for and how you're testing is different from the front end, shifting left and shifting all the way right.
Exactly. So the tips in here, don't let bad past experience get in the way. So all security guys, just just throw out
on both sides.
old.
That's important.
It's both sides, right? But tip number 2, participate in initial planning sessions, right? That means you have to be talking to devs as they're architecting, designing, identify potential concerns and issues so that it's part of the design planning process. Really good point. Do a deep dive with developers before your testing starts.
Yeah.
Right? Again, it's that communication. Go, okay, guys, I'm going to test the app. Here's what I know about the app. Is there anything else I should know before I do it?
Right.
That way there's no surprises when some findings come back.
And that's hard when you've got hundreds or thousands of applications.
I know.
Still largely manual.
Yep.
That's why I'm pushing for stuff that can help us with that automation in the middle.
Yeah. Tip 4 was interesting. Enjoy each other's testing perspectives. They're testing for specific use cases around their code. You're testing for security. Understand where those come together.
Yes.
And if you can integrate the two of them together, then it's a little easier, I think. And last one, under times of stress, try to be kind.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, because yelling at developers isn't going to help. And developers yelling because they got, a 3,000-page report, that's not going to help either.
And here's the point. If the developers... If you start yelling at developers and say, look, I can't release this code until all this stuff's done and blah, 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 I'm going to tell you they're going to get pressure from the business to push it anyways.
Yeah.
And then nobody's in a good situation.
Right.
It's because now that stuff's going to come out.
That priority is, I think, one of the keys to having a resilient application is collectively setting the priority. Because not every, I mean, what I've been thinking about lately is like, it doesn't matter if you have one developer or there is a finite amount of developers that you can have, right? It's not unlimited resources.
Right.
You can only tackle so many things with so many developers. And eventually, things are going to get left off the plate. If I got one developer or I have 100, right?
Yeah.
Those 100 developers, there's still going to be stuff that they can't do, right? Inside the app, you're resource limited no matter how many resources you have, right? Yeah. So it comes down to the size of your development team doesn't really matter. It's about priority. What do you want to focus on?
Yep.
And knowing the impact and doing the risk analysis on each vulnerability is really hard.
It is. And if we're not giving them that data in an efficient way, they're not. They don't even know how to fix it either. And so all you're doing is giving them all this data that adds to their plate of building feature requirements.
Right.
And they don't have enough context to know what to fix. That's just going to. They'll just fester, right? The stuff will never get fixed.
I think we've gotten to the point where automation can create tickets, but where we really struggle is priority and context.
Correct. Yeah.
That's really when I assess the products and methodologies on the market today, that's what I come down to.
Right, and that's why you're seeing new class of products evolve that are bringing in more context, more prioritization, better remediation actions. Eventually, as that market continues to build momentum, then the ability to do some automated remediation around that as part of the build process and some of the other things can kick in. We covered a really interesting a library for Python in application security a few weeks ago that looks at the code and says, oh yeah, this is a better way to actually build the code to make
Right.
it more secure, and it actually fixes it as it's being written, which was kind of cool, right? But
Kind of scary. Kind of
true, but without that context and without that understanding of what that impact is and how to remediate it, you could never build an automated tool like that.
Right.
All right, what else is in here?
I think that's really it for the stories. Cofense procures additional funding.
Yeah. The old Fish Me product got some additional funding. It looks like they bought out one of the investors. BlackRock came in and brought in some additional funding by buying out one of the providers. It'll be interesting to see how that, some of these phishing technologies and stuff continue to evolve with the move away from on-premise, now moving to O365 and Gmail. You've got some really good anti-phishing solutions out there protecting O365 and Gmail. Hopefully some of this investment can be used to help Cofense continue to move forward, but we'll see. Yeah, but more funding.
Outstanding. Stay tuned for interviews with Attack IQ, Blue Hexagon, Cold Fire Response Software, Morphosec, and Sophos.